Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 79. We're going to be talking about The Burbs, the Joe Dante film from 1989. And I'd like to introduce our guest. We have writer, journalist, and the host of the podcast Escaping Samsara, Nathan A. Thompson. Hey, Nathan.
Hi, guys. Really happy to be here.
Great to have you.
Yeah, I'm stoked.
We'll actually be on Escaping Samsara. Very iconoclastic from the rest of your guests on Escaping Samsara. Maybe you can explain that podcast for us.
Oh, well, it's a yoga and meditation podcast. So it's kind of a funny crossover with what you guys do on Scary Thoughts. But I don't know, I just really loved your podcast from the get-go. I think you guys are super clever and have loads of cool things to say. So I just sort of thought, hey, what can we do which is a crossover? And I thought, well, you guys do book reviews, so let's get on Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. And, we all sort of read it and had a talk. And I felt like that was a cool Venn diagram to do with the two podcasts. So we're nudging it up the queue. Hopefully it'll be out soon, and we'll let everyone know about that when it's out.
Great.
Yeah, speaking of nudging, that podcast episode was really fun for me because it has sort of nudged me into this more like sci-fi, esoterica, mysticism direction in my reading and just interest lately. And I think since that podcast, I've just been going deep. And so it was kind of a transitional moment. Yeah.
That's great, because another thing I didn't mention is that I'm also a big occult geek and into all kinds of mysticism, which does sometimes get on our Escaping Samsara podcast. I'm hoping to get Phil Misselberger soon, who is a Canadian psychologist and occultist, and currently reading Jason Louve's John Dee and the Empire of Angels, which is some excellent Elizabethan occult stuff in there. It's great.
And you had Eric Davis on too, right?
Yeah, can't wait for that to come out. It's just we went a bit crazy. We recorded about 25 episodes before we even released the first one, and then I went on recording episodes. So we've got this huge backlog, which is good for us. But yeah, there's loads of exciting content that I just kind of have to wait, and you got to release it when it can be released.
Of course.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear that. I'm reading his book High Weirdness right now, and I couldn't be happier with it. I mean, that book is just phenomenal.
It's so good. Yeah. He's got that way of writing where the sentences and the sentence structure is really complicated and intricate, but at the same time not alienating. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To be able to pull off that style of writing is when you're just not noticing it sometimes, is so impressive. And to have a book that's so academic, really, and to be so readable. I mean, to me, it's what you wished that Zero Books titles were doing is what he does. It's so good.
Absolutely. So you can email us at WHATTHE at scarythoughts.org about anything at all. We love hearing from you guys. And quick caveat, I apologize for the audio quality compared to our main episodes. We're, of course, currently in COVID shutdown, and we're doing this over Zoom. And also, Nathan is in what part of Australia?
On the Gold Coast right now, although I'm British, but a lot of British people, ended up in Australia.
All right, and you can all follow us on Spotify now. That's new, so subscribe to us there. And last little thing, spoilers ahead. All right, where do we want to start with The Burbs? This was, I think, as Chad has pointed out, perhaps the most requested thing that we cover in the history of Scary Thoughts. Is that actually true?
Yeah, way out in front is the most requested, and the most requested by the people who I consider the most serious of the listeners. People who are very invested in this stuff and listen to the show, and a lot of people that will message us and things like that. This is way out in front is the most requested show.
But this was also suggested by you. Is that right, Nathan? Did you come out and go hey guys, I want to come on and do The Burbs? I'm kind of forgetting at this point how we ended up here.
No, I just been bugging you on social media to do The Burbs, and
so you're one of those people.
I'm one of those people, and you kindly offered to have me on after we did our last podcast on my show. So
great. And was there something about the film in particular that made you think about us covering it, or was it just kind of thinking, oh, it's basically kind of a horror movie? What was it about this that you connected to our podcast?
Well, I should probably say up front that I'm phenomenally biased in favor of the Burbs, because it's one of those films that, we all have them. We watched them as a kid. We love them. It's got all those kind of happy memories watching with the family. My brothers and sisters would quote it to each other on car journeys and, make all kinds of jokes and references about it. And a lot of our family in-jokes are based around it. So, yeah, of course, I'm phenomenally biased about it, but also it doesn't get talked about enough. I think it is underrated, and it has like a lot of cool kind of 80s occult influences, like the Satanic Panic is obviously a big one, which is a super interesting time of history. So I feel like there's a lot going on there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, really, really similar to me. Like, this movie was one of those films that was just on HBO in constant rotation around the time I was like 11, and I've seen it an uncountable number of times. Like, and I hadn't seen it for a very long time. I probably haven't seen it since maybe 1999. But on rewatching, I was like, holy shit, man. Like, pretty much everything me and my friends said to each other at that time was a quote from this movie or like a Ninja Turtle quote. It was like anytime somebody went up on a lawn, you had to say, "Get off my lawn, lame-o." Like, or any number, or like, "This is no ordinary furnace." Like, to just any device, like anything that was like, it could be a car and you look under the hood, is like, "This is no ordinary engine." Like, that was just a constant joke. And I think Joe Dante is the best, man. I think this movie is so smart and so, like, to use Scary Thoughts nerd language, like, it's such a metatextual film. It's the sort of thing that only somebody who really loves this shit could have made. And then it has, like, one of my favorite things for horror movies is like a broad cast of deranged sidekicks and extras, or like side characters. Like, and this is one of the most deranged casts of all time, and I just love it.
That's true. I had no relationship to this movie. I think I didn't really even pay it any mind until the late 90s, when I may or may not have seen it. And it occurred to me about a month ago, that when we started setting up this episode, that I think I saw it 2 years ago and then forgot that I'd seen it because it left such a thin impression on me that I watched it again. And then I realized when I watched it again within the last week that I didn't remember anything. So I have a lot positive to say about this movie, but it is I think I have the opposite experience of you both, where it has no anchor in me at all, even after seeing it once a year for 3 years straight.
It was not well regarded at the time either. Like, it made its money back at the box office, and I think thanks to home video, it sort of had a life. But it was like, critics hated it, like normal fans hated it. It came out like right after Tom Hanks had shot Big, so it was sort of the stinker that he made around the same time of Big. It's really cool to see so many people have such love for this movie now.
What is the overarching criticism of it? I mean, I know what I don't like about it, but that usually doesn't line up with other people so much.
Well, it was just considered what it is, which was like a really thin, light plotted, shallow movie. But I would say what's so great about it is the shallowness, like all the different music cues and the way the camera moves in really specific ways, and the decision to use the backlot, the cul-de-sac neighborhood that has like 4 famous houses on it. Yeah. I mean, it's just like so many of those choices are so, to me, like, so intentional, indicative of Joe Dante's filmmaking, that, like, I think they're just totally special. But I guess at the time, in the mid to late 80s, it read as like lazy and shitty.
I think one thing that does resonate with me is that it reminds me of something like Scorsese's After Hours, or Jeremy Saulnier's Murder Party, or Louis Malle's Zazie dans le Métro, where what those movies do with the specifics of urban dynamics, it's this movie does with like hijinks that's more about the location rather than characters or circumstance. So it's just about being immersed in the histrionics of a place, the extreme version of a place, like, rather than the extremity of urbanness, like New York or Paris. It's the extremity of the banality of a cul-de-sac. I couldn't think of a rural example of this at all. I can't think of any decent slapstick screwball comedies about farming that are more about farming than they are about characters or something. I don't know.
What was it about the location you were talking about, Chad? You said it was a famous location. I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a back lot, and it's just on the Sony Pictures back lot. And like one of the houses is like the Munsters house, like the house that that
Corey
Ricky
Feldman.
is in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why they don't shoot that house so much is like way too many people to recognize it. And then one of the houses is from Leave It to Beaver, and like a lot of movies have been shot on this little cul-de-sac, so you see it all the time, over and over and over again. And even the Klopex house, I can't remember what it was in later on, but even that house has sort of become like a more of a famous house.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, and the fact that it all takes place in that one location is pretty great. And then apparently there were studio tours going on, so like all day throughout the shooting, like they would just have to stop, and like this tour would go through. And they would restart and do the movie, like, which is so like a thing from a movie of its time, you know, like you would like have like, I don't know, like Roger Rabbit chased around the back lot and like run through a painted wall or something like that. It just has that madcapness, and I'm sure we'll talk about Looney Tunes and cartoons later, but yeah, it's just such a weird location.
Yeah, I can see that why it wouldn't have done particularly well at the time, because I just think this is really a classic example of a cult movie where, you know, it needs people to find the little bits and love it and pass it on to their friends and that kind of stuff. And that whole kind of trajectory has sort of coalesced a lot around what you guys do, because it's like people who are into that kind of thing. And so it's kind of got that cult appeal, but it doesn't surprise me that it didn't do too well at the box office at the time. Doesn't trailer well, probably.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I
not.
like what you're saying about finding the little things, because there are so many. The things that about this movie that I liked the most are the little details, like, you know, the spaghetti western music employed for a little bit of a showdown on the front lawn. You know, that's a beautiful sort of filmic moment. But it's also in the midst of like, oh, he's climbing up a ladder. I bet he'll fall off of it. Yep, he fell off the ladder. Oh, he's climbing up a ladder again. Oh, I bet he'll fall off again. Still not funny. You know, like,
but like, come
it's
on,
this
Bruce
back
Dern
and forth.
falling off the roof. Bruce Dern falling off the roof. That's the
that was different. No, absolutely.
And
that's different.
I mean, I'll even say, like, I think Joe Dante was Quentin Tarantino before Tarantino was, because like Bruce Dern has fallen off the roof of a dozen buildings in old westerns. You know, like so that was like a very like intentional decision to have him do that. And then like anytime that character Rumsfeld comes on the screen, you get that Jerry Goldsmith Platoon note, which is funny because Jerry Goldsmith did the score for this movie, so he's like sampling his own work. To me, like,
right,
if this movie came out brand new right now on Netflix, everyone would be raving about it.
What did you guys think of the? Did you notice the dog barking sample in like the ride at the beginning, where Queenie the little dog goes to take a dump on Rumsfeld's lawn? Now, if you listen to the score like a million times, you'll notice that they've sampled a little dog yelp. It goes ruff, 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 ruff. It's a sample of a dog. Seriously.
Oh, totally. That stuff cuts right into me.
Oh, is it too much for you, man?
No. I mean, I really noticed that kind of weird, those kind of details.
So what did you think of the score then, Mark?
I was kind of divided, because it's clearly brilliant, but it is a type of score, not type like with the variety, but rather the zany orchestral score that like Danny Elfman bludgeoned into the ground is sort of just, you know, this is just a taste thing. This is not a criticism. I really don't like that music. It really distracts me from watching a movie. And yeah. But clearly brilliant, no question.
For me, the brilliance is in the juxtaposition of this hugely dramatic score and just the banal, like, little things that they're getting up to. I think that's what makes it for me.
Yeah, and I think banality, I think, is where it's strongest. Like, I think that, you know, the first meeting in the, what are the villains' last names? Klopek?
The Klopeks.
Yeah, in their parlor when they're just sort of hosting. That scene is like twice as long as it should be and mostly kind of silent and uncomfortable. And that's kind of my favorite part of the movie. The movie just like slams to a screeching halt for people to just kind of stare uncomfortable at each other and eat sardines.
Well, even that scene is like solid. Very much like, to me, that whole scene is about like Brother Theodore's work. Like, who, if you've seen the film, he's the oldest of the Klopeks, but he was also this like, I guess I just have to refer to him as a performance artist, but he was very much that character on late night shows and one man shows and stuff. So that very long, painful, like Eastern European Andy Kaufman thing. It's like Joe Dante made a stage for him within his film.
Yeah, it's sort of like a cross between so Spalding Gray and like Father Guido Sarducci. This sort of like, it's not stand up, it's kind of performance art, but it's its own thing. Like he just kind of made up his own thing.
You can find a black and white video of him on Jerry Lewis's show that is so brutal and so he's like taking it to Jerry Lewis, and he does this like impression of Jerry Lewis that is so good and so dark, and like it clearly angered Jerry Lewis in the moment. It's definitely worth looking at. I mean, Brother Theodore, I had not really thought about him, and then I didn't really know about all of his like weird work, and man, I am such a fan now.
Yeah, he really is adept at embodying seething, hateful rage.
Yeah. And then Carrie Fisher just playing it straight is kind of an interesting choice.
How so?
Just, I think at the time she may have been the biggest star, like a pretty big star. She's come off Empire Strikes Back a few years right before this, and Return of the Jedi is right around this time. And, she's not really doing anything except for being like a straight man in it, and then I don't know if you guys ran across this, but it's not in the film at all. But the reason why he's home is that he's lost his job and he hasn't told his wife. Oh. And it's a total. So you're like, okay, well, why is he off randomly in the middle of the summer and the family isn't also off? And he just wants to take this time off. So like in the script, he's been fired and he's trying to keep it from her. And so at the very end, when he's like, oh, I'm going to take another week off. You're like, well, what kind of job do you have? Like, well, he's just not working, which is part of like I think that would have been so good to have included in the film because it explains his manicness a little bit more.
That's true. Yeah. I wonder why that didn't get included.
Who knows? I mean, and Tom Hanks really fought to not have a kid in the movie, which is why the kid's so minimized in it. Because he didn't want to go he was like trying to be a young actor guy and didn't want to go right into dad roles.
Yeah.
Which I think was the part.
It could, like, I wouldn't go as far to say Tom Hanks was miscast because he does a really good job of the role, but he's clearly too young for that role, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, to be like a jaded, like owning a house it's interesting. Like I never really thought about him being in it or not in it. It's so hard to think of anyone not in this movie that's in this movie,
And what's weird is there's that scene where he watches Mr. Rogers in bed and then he grew up to play Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
So kind of a weird callback there.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. This is something I wanted to throw out to our audience is like, I've been trying to think of it like that scene in particular, like when you're watching a movie and it's not delivering exposition. So it's not like you're watching a zombie movie and the news is telling you that the zombie invasion is coming, but like trying to think of like if there's a film term for that. Like it's not picture in a picture because that's one thing.
It's parallel to talking about non-diegetic sound. Like there's the score and then there's when the character's listening to music.
Can you just explain like which one is which? Diegetic is in the film and which is and non-diegetic is which one?
Non-diegetic is when it's like the narrator speaking, and diegetic is when you can actually hear it inside the film. So
in that case, it functions. Mr. Rogers functions as both because Tom Hanks can see it on one level, but then the audience is seeing it in that kind of like ironic way, because obviously the neighborhood is terrible for Hanks at that moment.
Non-diegetic sound is when you're watching a movie and there is sound and the characters could not possibly hear it. So narration, sound effects, mood music, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And then the French have this, like, like to allow us to get our pretentious points here. The French have this term, I think it's mise en abîme, which is sort of like when you see in a painting, there's like a painting within the painting of the scene. And so it's like image in the abyss is what it translates to. And that's sort of in the direction. But then there's also like this like concept called like metadiegetic, which is when something is in a piece and it's referring to the piece in a dreamlike way, which is really like that scene where he's like watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. He falls asleep and he wakes up. And I just can't believe I haven't been able to find a good term for it. Like there's a term for everything, like a what do they call it when the Spielberg, it's the 1-2, the twofer shot? Like there's a term for everything, right? So I just can't think of a term for this thing.
Yeah.
But the point is, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is in a lot of these movies like that, right?
It's sort of a staple, yeah. I wonder if it's just easier to get.
It's got to be cheaper because Canon Films put it out, and they are like the ones that are like super broke and made like all the Delta Force movies. So I imagine it's probably cheaper than Tobe Hooper's first one.
Right. That makes sense.
Which is owned by the mob, so it might be kind of like maybe that's why you never see it.
Yeah.
Did you recognize any of the other films from that little sequence? Because there's that one where it's kind of always struck me as weird because they take a woman over a flaming pit and then stab her, and I'm kind of like, well, at that point, the stabbing just seems like a bit unnecessary. But anyway, that was a weird film that was on that sequence. Do you guys know where they are? What they are?
Not. I don't know.
Well, I mean, at least it starts with these great horror movies, and then transcends into one of the most fun, like dreamlike, surreal sequences where he's stabbed to death on a barbecue.
Yeah.
And I love that, that image or, that kind of reference to a barbecue as just that thing you do with your neighbors, it's just
totally.
It's so appropriate for like exactly what is going on in the film at that time. It's just great choice.
Yeah, just to have a dream sequence too. And you had mentioned the Satanic Panic earlier. It's like, I mean, that was a real live thing that people were super scared of. And then this movie's like making fun of it, which, I mean, it'd be almost like, I guess the equivalent would be now if there was like a cancel culture movie or something like that. But even then it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Satanic Panic hit me pretty hard because I was like, a young teenager into heavy metal and horror movies going to Catholic schools. So it was kind of a rough go.
Well, I mean, there is the element to this movie that it is making fun of it, but it is correct. The panic is rightly aimed, right? I mean, that's the conclusion of this movie, is that it's worth sticking your nose into your neighbor's business. It's worth being suspicious of foreigners. If you suspect someone of satanic tomfoolery, taking it further pays off, right? Like this is one of those movies that reinforces the panic part of the Satanic Panic.
I get what you're saying, but like I don't feel a particular moral judgment of the Klopeks in the film either. Like, you know what I mean? They're not. I don't, because in that way it kind of implies maybe like the movie has a moral message to convey. That's probably a better way of. But I definitely don't feel that from this movie.
I wouldn't say that this movie specifically has a moral agenda or anything, but it's hard for me not to look at it as being quite reflective of its time in the sort of, I don't know, long wake of Reagan-era America paranoia around foreigners and difference. It's not, I'm not saying that it has an agenda, but it is not free from that agenda either.
I get that, but like I do feel like I've thought about this, and I don't think the Klopeks' weirdness demon, their demented nature, I don't feel that is related to their ethnicity or in any kind of specific way. Like I think that the choice, and maybe it was a subconscious choice, foreigners are like not what we want in America in this time. But, I think a more kind of clear choice would be just the link to Transylvania and the vampire legends, which would explain that choice to make them from Eastern Europe.
Right.
And they're so clearly over the top creepy too. You know what I mean? It's not just that they're foreigners and that the kid looks like he could play like a rusted instrument in a street folk punk band. It's like they have like painting of surgery and like weird candles and like they're just oddballs, and
you could have got the same effect with just a white normal family, but I think, like I say, the ethnicity does play into those vampiric legends, and I don't necessarily think that the fact they're foreigners is in any way implied to mean that's the cause or linked to their weirdness personally.
Well, obviously, if we back up, everybody in this film is histrionically an absurd rendering of whatever they are. But I think that there is this element of otherness to the Klopeks that is sort of part and parcel. Just like they're scary and weird and outsiders, and of course they're mass murderers. It's kind of funny, the thinking about that Corey Feldman's character actually lived in the Munsters house, because there was always this difference between the Munsters and the Addams family, right? And what was so beautiful about the Addams family is they were freaks and outsiders, but they were gloriously bonded. Like the Munsters, there's always this sort of tension around that they're attempting this sort of nuclear family normalcy. But the Addams family were like, loved each other and they were bound together and they had each other's backs and they did not care. They didn't try to be anybody's friend. They were just doing their thing. And if you were on board, you were on board. And I think that was such a great part about that show. And an amazing critique of, suburban values, quite frankly. And this movie doesn't critique suburban values. It doesn't have to, but it really doesn't.
I don't know, man. The whole thing seems like a send up. Like it just seems like such a goof on the Burbs.
It's a goof on the Burbs, but it is the Joe Dante, crane up, fade to black. It's zany, but the family unit has been, reified and is solid again. And people have learned their lesson. And you know what I mean? I mean, it's a screwball comedy, so I'm not trying to put any sort of morality on it. I'm just saying it's not completely free of this tradition, the cliches of that sort of that moment.
I agree with that, and while we're on the subject, I should bring up something my sister said about the female characters. I mean, they obviously suffer from a lot of the renderings of female characters of that era as well. You've got the kind of bimbo, and then Carrie Fisher. I mean, she does kind of play the straight man role, but at the same time, she's also falls into that category of just like the woman that's there to spoil the boys' fun, right? Don't do this, don't do that.
Fully.
Yeah, the whole the cigar, the whole the idea that he can't go into his house to smoke the cigar because she's like a nagging wife. That it's such a thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the camera is basically, on board for a gynecological exam of Bruce Dern's wife's character, who, her name is not even very memorable. It's
no tan lines.
Her. That's just so boring.
To you.
Jesus.
Man, when I was watching this, I realized this is my ideal lifestyle, living in a suburb like that. I would be so fucking stoked to live in a suburb where you had extra boxes of cereal in the cupboard and stuff. And did you guys notice that the cereal they're eating, one of them is the Gremlins cereal?
Oh yeah,
I did not notice that. It came from the original Gremlins film.
Yeah, because there was Gremlins breakfast cereal at the time, and I remember it because I had it. But yeah, it's such a funny, Joe Dante always has those little ties between movies, the garbage man who was the snowplow operator in Gremlins, the man that lives down there. I mean,
I always wondered why are they talking about spiritual healing, the garbage man? I'm does that reference anything, or is that just what the hell?
It's so weird. This one coworker that's into this pretty well articulated like spiritual sort of like proselytizing, and he has like the goofy like rainbow patch on his uniform. It's such an odd character.
Well, that is one thing that we can sort of credit Joe Dante for, is oftentimes he is able to give a character who maybe has 2 lines actual depth. Even where so many of these characters are painted with very broad strokes, they at least kind of have some extra thing, even when they're a caricature, and that always makes his movies more interesting than a lot of other of his contemporaries.
I think it's so smart, and it's like comedy seems to do it really well. Like there's so many comedies that have like breakout parts for people, like whether it be like Will Ferrell in Old School or whatever, like there's these like direct comedy directors give their, not as important actors these moments to just break out. And it seems like a thing that like every movie should do, like it just adds up to a more interesting whole.
It's just better writing, really. And, or a director's willingness to let actors be better actors, even if the part doesn't have a lot to work with.
Yeah, and this film was done in the middle of a writer's strike. And so a lot of the really funny lines in this movie are like ad-libbed. Like, so they had like pretty much the bare bones script. And then, like one of the more notable ad-lib scenes is when Tom Hanks grabs the whole gurney and throws it into the back of the ambulance and just jumps on top of it. Just total ad-lib moment. And that sort of thing just reminds me like the Joker movie when we reviewed that, like just knowing that ad-libbing is coming and being able to incorporate that into your movie must be such a different skill.
I'm curious, going back to Chad, you were saying you would love to be living in a suburban cul-de-sac. What are your respective relationships to the suburbs and suburbia? I have very strong feelings and relationship to it, but I'm curious about you guys.
Well, I grew up in a suburb not like this, probably not as nice, outside of New Orleans. Probably more like the suburb that's in Poltergeist, I guess would be a better like description of it. And I don't know, like I live in this like urban wasteland now, and just the idea of just walking past lawns while I'm walking my dog with like neighbors mostly minding their own business seems pretty awesome, like compared to my lifestyle now.
I mean, for me, it's like, I think it's more of it's like an aspirational thing now, there's that critique of the Friends series where it's like crazily aspirational, like this lifestyle that no one can achieve. And yeah, maybe in like 1989, that was a realistic kind of goal for most people to go and like, well, most white people, let's be honest. But yeah, like now that's crazily aspirational. I don't think like, it would be possible for me.
Yeah, any one of those houses in San Francisco would be like a $2.2 million house. So
right.
It's so insane.
But the house isn't in San Francisco. It would be in a suburb, right? So San Francisco is not a suburb. I mean, I think that's,
yeah, I mean, it's sort of Facebook's suburb now, but
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I mean, maybe a way to think about it is it's about a community, isn't it? Neighborhood, isn't it? It's sort of, you've got your neighborhood, you've got like these weird people that are kind of like, together. I think it's actually one of the more inspiring things about it is they all get on. Like Walter is, I don't know, he pisses people off. Maybe he's not so popular, but those 3 guys, they're good mates. They have like Ricky along, they have that kind of intergenerational sort of friendship that can grow in the burbs. And like, I think that's sort of, I think the movie does celebrate that, and I think that is something that's worth celebrating wherever it occurs, whether it's in the burbs or wherever. That kind of intergenerational friendship, friendship between men, as well. It's a cool thing to celebrate. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so right on. I mean, I think about right now, it would be tough for me to round up 3 dudes to go break into someone's house. Like when I was younger, I mean, I have done it. So yeah, I knew it was possible when I was young, but like as an adult, it's just not possible, or I guess it is possible.
I'd break into a house with you, Chad. I'd break into a house with you.
I'm excited. We'll have to figure out some crimes to do if you ever come out there. Well, Mark, now that your immigration status is settled, I guess you're able to do crimes as well.
Yeah, without, deportation as being the consequence. Yeah.
Yeah, just normal jail time for you these days.
Yeah, I can take it. I've already got some tattoos. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll have to figure out what gang to join if you go to prison.
Oh, Jesus.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I always grew up in a suburb of a major city, whether it was Toronto or Montreal or San Francisco, and never liked the suburbs. I always felt uncomfortable there. I could never relate to the way it was laid out, the way culture sort of was arranged. Like, I think the very thing that you guys are describing, like, oh, it'd be great, like that was never great to me, just kind of primally.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to move to a city, and I did, and I think it's just sort of, it's almost like a bigotry. It's ingrained in me at this point that I don't trust the suburbs and always feel so uncomfortable whenever I leave an urban situation. I think I'm more comfortable out in the wasteland than I am in the sprawl. But
that's because you were cool. See, if people who were cool like feel like that about cities, like
yes.
For me, like when I was in a suburb, I was really uncool. I was basically like kind of like a Boo Radley character in my neighborhood because I didn't really go outside, and when I did, I had black clothes. I just looked weird, And then later, when I went into like the city, like that suburbanness was present and uncool too. So I always felt like an oddball in the suburbs, and then just like not really welcome in cities. And I guess to a certain extent, I still feel like that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think might be happening, and I know I've talked about this on this podcast before, or maybe not, is the 20th century cities were constructed around white flight, and you can see a really good examination of this in a TV show like Mad Men, which is all about the mid-century expansion of post-war. And so the cities were, quote, dangerous, and the suburbs were like this new vista, it's the continued expansion of America. But what's happening now is that in a again, Friends and Sex and the City, etc. world, people want to move to the city, and a lot of the, people want to live near their startups, and people want urban living. And what it's done, and have been pushing the lower classes out, and the lower classes are going to the suburbs. And so it's kind of inverting. The white flight is sort of gone in the opposite direction. And I think what that is kind of meaning is this idea that the cultural center where people who have, where the cool kids who don't have money but have a lot of ideas come to congregate, if they can't do it in urban centers anymore because they've been pressed out by people who make $250,000 a year working at a startup.
Holla.
There you go. They're going to have...
It's not me, by the way.
It's not me. I'm just hanging on by the skin of my teeth. I think that we're going to see our notion of the avant-garde and bohemia move out to the suburbs. So this cul-de-sac where it's this, in this movie, it's this frame of middle-class values amidst all its zaniness. That cul-de-sac now probably has like a meth lab in it.
I gotta disagree a little bit, Mark.
Yeah. Please. Oh, go ahead.
just coming from London, you can see this process very, very clearly. And you're right, but to the extent that like the lower classes that are pushed out, they've been going to like the shitty suburbs. Now, what we've got in the Burbs is a really nice suburb. Like that is then the nice suburb is used by, the upper management people who want to have a family outside the city. So in London, you see like, the city centre being like a corporate hellhole. No disrespect to London, it's a great city. But you get these kind of, the edgy areas are kind of in this sort of, like interzone between the sort of city and then the kind of nice burbs. Do you know what I mean? You have this kind of donut. And then actually a lot of the artists are going like to, places on the coast, these old, creaky, decaying old Victorian seaside resorts. That's where the artists and the kind of avant-garde is now a lot in South England.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a friend who actually moved to Margate and like opened a studio.
Margate, man. Yeah.
It's adorable, but yeah, it's of all places to go and be a musician. It made no sense to me until I realized like, oh, he's got a storefront and a studio and he can host shows and it costs him nothing.
Man, living cheap is so great. Like, I mean, it's so,
yeah.
I mean, perfect.
No,
like,
it's real.
I pay an extraordinary amount of money to live, and there's a dude right outside right now. I don't know if you can hear him just screaming. Like that shit is terrible. And like in my fantasy suburb, that is not the case. Although, I don't know. Something else I think what might be happening in the future for artists is a weird suburban communal experience. Like, have you seen like how like 4 or 5 YouTube influencers will move in together and then just get like a McMansion wherever and use it as their like lifestyle studio?
Yeah, or young rappers.
Yeah, rappers too.
Makes perfect sense to me. I think when I was talking about this cul-de-sac in the Burbs, I was thinking that if that place literally existed at 89, it's probably not nice anymore. If it was new now, it would be nice, but those houses would now be, 30 plus years old, 40 years old, and maybe not as nice as it was before and might be more run down. And
true.
The nice suburb is now a few cities over.
True, but it was inhabited by a family of mass murderers.
There you go. Yeah.
So it can happen anywhere.
Anywhere.
That probably affects the property values really badly, having serial killers move in. It's like such a concern.
But yeah, like actually, I wanted to mention like what you were saying earlier, Chad, about the Tarantino thing. I think, because I noticed another similarity there where, the criticism of the Burbs is that, it's lightly plotted and that's fair, but you'll enjoy the film a lot more if you see it as a series of vignettes. It's not to the extent that Tarantino took it, but if you think about it, as these amazing little vignettes, and like some of them work better than others. Like I would definitely cut the stuff with art and the big dog, just get rid of the dog like wholesale. And, there's a few things that are worth cutting, but there's great moments with, like just the bees coming out and, when they're sort of just digging in the lawn. In fact, that shot, where he's like watching them, and you just see them digging and you've got the music just fitting so appropriately. And it's a great moment.
I love that scene so much. Like the way the dirt is in the background, it shows like both obsession and laziness, because they're all over the place and there's a lot of holes, but none of them are that deep except for the first one. So it's just like this ADHD like excavation.
Dogs are never value added to movies.
True.
Thank you.
This dog, the little dog in this, is the dog that is Precious in Silence of the Lambs. Did you know that?
Yes, and that is my favorite thing about this movie.
So what is your criticisms, Mark? I feel a little bit like, me and Chad have this whole love affair with this movie. So, you're a sober person, you're a sane person, right? You don't have like these crazy, associations with your childhood. So,
and no agenda at all.
And,
well, it's funny. I was, the other night I was listening to my friend Andy's radio show online, and there's a chat, there's a live chat, and he plays really difficult, obscure, weird metal. And the chat room on his show is regularly like ultra music nerds, like people who are into the most obscure weird shit. And the band VNV Nation came up and everybody was like, oh, they rule, yeah, they're great. And I was like, no, none of you can possibly be, oh, I know what's happening. All of you were like punk goths when this came out and don't realize that it's shitty Metropolis Cleopatra garbage goth music, but it hit you at just the right moment. And so you all have amazing taste, except there are these things that you'll never be able to revise, like I can't about the stuff that hit me in my prime too. And that obviously I think works on this movie. What I'm hearing happening here is that there's a lack of objectivity. I'm totally being mean. I apologize, but I get it. I'm that way with things too.
Out, Mark. You got to be brutal.
Okay. D&D Nation does suck.
Thank you. So I think that The neighbor and his eating isn't funny. The overbearingness, relentlessness of what's the main neighbor, the blonde guy who is the biggest shit disturber?
What, Art?
That's Art, right?
Okay.
I must be Art.
Okay, yeah. He is not funny. Nothing he does in this movie is funny, and it's always on 11. He keeps climbing up a ladder and falling down. He keeps yelling louder than everybody. And that's this is just a pet peeve of mine. But when there's a scene where multiple people are talking at the same time and nobody's noticing that the other person's talking, everybody's just sort of a sociopath running their mouth. It's never funny. It was very common in the 80s for movies to do that, especially the 70s. Sorry. Doesn't work. It's just annoying. It just crosses over into this like surreal not funniness. Yeah, I just feel like when it's subtle, it's a really good movie, and when it's histrionic, it's just its zaniness is just overbearing and did not date well.
Perhaps cartoonish is the phrase you're looking for.
You know, I don't mind cartoonish, but at the same time, like, you know, we were saying about the woman character. Like, is that funny? Is a bimbo funny, or is it like, yeah, that's how unimaginative the writing can be in this movie? Is just this plastic bimbo who revels in the sexual attention of a teenager. Like, is that funny?
Okay, so I'm going to say that I think it is funny. We've just become like suspicious of that gaze. So you see it deployed in an identically hilarious way in the last season of Stranger Things, where the young bully character is like, he's become the object of affection, and it's as funny as this was at its time. It's just,
but it's not like it's not the thing of it. It's not like, an adult woman who's into a teenage boy or the attention of a teenage boy. It's the flatness of her character. There are almost no women in this show, and one is a fucking drag and the other is a fucking idiot. You know, and I'm not even bringing this up as some sort of like feminist position. I'm bringing it up as a bad writing position. Like, if there was a black person in this movie who had more than 3 lines, what kind of caricature would they be? And how would we be talking about it right now?
I'm sure it would not age. It would not age well, I'm sure.
That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think I don't know if it's necessarily bad writing. I think you can criticize it from a feminist perspective on those lines, and I would wholeheartedly agree. But with the writing, I think like a good reason why this movie works so well is because it's that kind of the men sort of descend to the level of little boys, you know, and Carol is used as a kind of I don't know the technical term, you know, a ploy to sort of like bring that out, and then you're sort of getting into kind of like almost like a homage to like those old like Little Rascals type sort of capers. And yeah, that's part of, I think I think that's part of what's really enjoyable about that movie. And I don't know how you'd be able to pull that off without, you know, a foil like Carol. The Bonnie character is, yeah, by today's standards, pretty inexcusable. Definitely should have been, you know, written better. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so awesome you mentioned the Little Rascals gang thing, because like that's such Joe Dante's thing. Like I listened to this really delightful interview where he just talked about how, even though he was aware not for everybody this was the case, but for him, being a kid in the 1950s was like the shit. Like it was like coonskin hats and BB guns and like proto skateboards and shit and monster movies and all the stuff that like Stephen King writes about. And it's fun to see him like kind of bring like what I almost assume is like a middle-aged take on his childhood to the screen, which is like, it's so specific. And I think the only time you ever really see it anymore is in horror. Like it's only ever represented uncritically in horror movies. Like whether it be like the most notable example would be the new It movies. Like that sort of like young gang of kids. Unless there's other examples I'm just not thinking of.
Maybe, yeah.
That's a good point.
I mean, maybe the Fast and the Furious is a little bit like that, but for different reasons.
Well, I mean, it does articulate a certain, I mean, you know, I'm by no means taking what you're saying to task. I'm more just sort of articulating further on it, that it might have been a cool time and place to be a kid if you're a white middle to upper, maybe upper lower class kid in America in certain areas. Male,
of course.
male with a
he
certain.
says as much too.
Yeah,
like Lovecraft Country is going on elsewhere while that's going on. You know,
Yes.
like all that crazy shit. But like so much of this is like slapstick Looney Tunes humor. You know, even the music cues when people fall off a shit or get blown up with lightning or. You know, Tom Hanks exploded. He just walks out of a blown up building with like smoke coming off of him, like Wile E. Coyote. It's so influenced by that. And Joe Dante speaks repeatedly about like his jam was cartoons, like even more than movies. Like the thing that he's most influenced by were cartoons of the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I think that totally comes out in.
Yeah, I think childhood is definitely a theme of this movie, isn't it? You know, that whether it's like, you know, referencing the Little Rascals, that 1950s thing, or, you know, the Looney Tunes type references, you know, and I think that's probably why it's such a potent, you know, combination of like neurotropics, you know, for people like myself, where it's like not only is the movie invoking some of the most beautiful and awesome parts of childhood, if you were privileged enough to have that experience, but to actually watch that while you're a child, it's like, whoa, you know, big look.
And I just want to sort of be a little clear on what I was getting at. Is I wasn't specifically trying to go like, oh, but that's because he's a straight white male. I was more sort of trying to articulate that that is the pining for something that is actually incredibly free. So the idea that that was a great time to be alive, like, well, it's actually a great time to be a young white male kid of means, because there was such this incredible freedom that this world rarely knows in that time and place and identity. The freedom to move through this world that was afforded to baby boomer men, white baby boomer men in this country, is maybe the peak freedom in the history of humanity for a collection of people, right? And so to be wistful about it, like, fucking right. Like, that was awesome, you know? Like, ain't nobody had it so good as those kids. For like the freest range kids that have ever lived, right?
I mean, I think that's a great point, and that's very true. But you know, it actually came up over the weekend. I was watching Lethal Weapon with my, you know, I'd never seen it. You know,
that's funny. It's on its own.
It's a great.
I'd never seen it.
Shane Black's masterpiece.
What'd you think?
Like, you know, we were all, you know, there was like me and it was my brother-in-law, right? You know, so there was two guys, two girls watching this, and we were all getting very wistful, going, it would be so great to live in the 80s, you know. And then it's just like, yeah, but like if you're a woman, you probably wouldn't be able to get a job, and not a good one anyway. So yeah,
but if you were hot enough, you wouldn't need one. Hey.
Wow.
Very true.
Sorry, yeah. I could tell Mark is about to explode.
I'd like to actually, if we could, go to your criticism, Mark, because we did brush over that.
Yeah, there wasn't enough already.
No, because it was about the criticism of art as a character, and I hadn't thought of it, but I agree a lot with what you were saying. Like, if you think about it, the weakest moments in this film are all to do with him overacting. You know, I mean, the bit where he electrocutes himself is not funny. The scene with the dog needs to be cut. I mean, the thing is that I wonder, is that a problem of casting? Like, I don't want to disrespect the actor. I forget his name. He was also in Groundhog Day, you know, weirdly, because he's obviously not a bad actor. But you know, that role, when it's played subtly, is a really important role, isn't it? He's the accelerator. He's the guy, you know, that like drags everyone into it. It's a very important role. But like, maybe that could have been, like, better cast or better written. Maybe.
Yeah, And I think that, I often bring up the issue when criticizing narrative film that I don't think there are any rules here. But to get us on board with your characters, there are certain things that are pretty safe bets. And Tom Hanks walks on the screen and he's an immediately likable guy. So we're on board with Tom Hanks. It doesn't take much with that actor. And there's enough in the dynamic of the first few scenes that, like, you like him. He's affable. He's a goofy guy. He's struggling as a suburban dad with his kid and his wife, but it's just slightly relatable enough. But then his neighbor walks in the house and there is no indication why they would be friends. And there's a lot of like, well, they're all neighbors and they're in this together. And yeah, but he walks into the house and helps himself to food, is totally rude, condescending, dismissive, doesn't listen to anybody in the house. But he's a bully. There was no point at which we were given why this is his best friend. They don't seem to be friends.
They grew up together.
They did?
Yeah, there's the whole part where they're talking about like the guy making the milkshake, and it's milkshake blood, and like how he like, and then in the dream sequence, Art is the milkshake man with the bloody milkshake. Like they were talking about basically like growing up in the town and how like nothing ever happened there, and like that was it was so unusual to like live in like, or how great it was to live in a place where nothing ever happened. But yeah, they both grew up in Mayfield or whatever it's called.
Oh, I totally missed that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, like if I was being nitpicky, it could be possible they're from the same town but didn't know each other when they were kids. But it's a small town, and so I'll go with you on this one. I think that's probably where it comes from.
Nonetheless, I still don't get the. It's just too much. Even for a comedy, it's too much.
Well, is that a problem of casting or acting or writing?
I don't know. Good question.
It could be casting because Tom Hanks was supposed to have not gotten along very well with Rick DeComan is the actor's name. Like they were supposed to not have been like enemies or anything, but like there was tension between them.
But there isn't even a moment in the writing where one says something warm to the other that I can think.
Yeah, they're not friends. They're like frenemies.
But he like, when he goes over to smoke the cigar, he knows that about him, doesn't he? He goes, oh, he comes over here to smoke cigars because his wife won't let me. He doesn't know I know that. So yeah, you're right. There's definitely a kind of, it's a good example of when people are kind of forced to be friends. Yeah, frenemies maybe is the word.
Yeah.
But while we're talking on characters, can I point out the introduction for Rumsfeld when you see the door open and that low shot and the sunglasses come on? They're playing Circus of Power. That's the name of the band. I forget.
Yeah.
I think Machine by Circus of Power. I encourage any Burbs fans to look that up on YouTube. The comment section is delightful.
Yeah.
But as an introduction to a character, I don't think it gets much better than that. It's just like instantly you've got him right from just 2 seconds of that.
See, I think his character is a weird example where his character is so overblown. I mean, especially the very last line of the film where he looks down the barrel of the gun and says, I love this street, and like shrugs and walks off. It's just so
Ricky,
fucking...
Man.
Oh, I thought that's
he's talking about Rumsfeld. No,
I'm sorry.
So Ricky turns the music on because he's painting the house, and he turns it on, and then but that music cues Rumsfeld into the scene.
I'm sorry.
It does sort of introduce both of them, though. So it's such a powerful song that it needs two characters.
If I can just save my mistake. The thing I think I was getting at is that talking about, characters and being overblown, Corey Feldman's character is totally overblown and heavy-handed and hammy, but he is so interesting and makes weird enough choices that I think it works. I don't know how that happened, but like his character's absurd and overdone. He's good at it, so
it's
he gets
Corey
a pass.
Feldman. It's the Corey Feldman-ness, which, given the wackiness and the general chaos of what's going on in the movie, just like hell, it really works.
I mean, that's the funny thing about Tom Hanks, Corey Feldman. Like, that's the funny thing about star power. is like, it's not necessarily like, oh, we all know him. Like, no, there's something about him where you point a camera at him and it's probably going to work out fine. Doesn't mean the movie will be good, but it'll engage people, and they both have that for sure.
I wanted to be Corey Feldman so bad when I was a little kid. Like between Goonies, Lost Boys, and this, I thought he was like the coolest person that had ever lived. and then
now he really is.
Yeah, like he's living the life now. But this was like peak Corey Feldman, man. He was on drugs. He was borrowing Michael Jackson's monkey, like Bubbles, the chimpanzee, was in his trailer, like shitting everywhere, tearing shit up. Had to be banned from the set. I mean, and then apparently Carrie Fisher helped him get off drugs around this time. I don't know, a lot of fondness for that particular Corey.
For sure.
Do you think he adds much, Mark, or
Yeah.
what would you say about his character?
Oh yeah, I think without him as a framing device, it would be a lesser movie. Because he's not just a character; he's part of the frame.
Yeah, he's like he's the semi-reliable narrator in a weird way. Like,
yeah.
And you had told, like, we have this thing about, like, William S. Burroughs's idea of the Johnson is a person that, like, it's like a moral code, like a person that minds their own business but keeps their word, and kind of just like a black market knight almost. And you were saying, like, there's no Johnsons in this movie, and then I had disagreed
I was
at the
complaining.
time.
Yeah,
and so I agree. But then I realized, I was like, oh, well, Corey Feldman's the Johnson out of my fondness and loyalty to him. And I realized he's not, because he's literally using the whole street as his television. Like the whole code of the Johnson is about minding your own business, and literally no one but the Klopeks mind their own business. And then if you consider murder your business, maybe they even violate that rule,
Yeah, I think murder is a violation of minding one's own business.
Yeah.
But there is something Johnsonish about, like, just sitting on your porch and go like, hey man, good job. Hey you, right on. Hey, looking good. Just being supportive of everybody, whether they're trying to burn someone else's house down or they're cutting their lawn, right? Just like, I'm just going to drink a beer and watch you be amazing.
Or just an appreciation for the chaos of the everyday.
Yes, that too. I'm curious, Nathan, if you have other movies in your past, well, this is a question for both of you, but that you kind of have no objectivity about, but you love to talk about, but you want to dissect, but it's difficult, like The Burbs. Do you have other things like that?
I mean, yeah, the main one would be What's Up, Doc, that old 70s movie with Barbara Streisand and a bunch of other famous people who I can't remember.
I just watched that a month ago.
It's a joy.
Everything really
about that
fun.
movie is a joy.
It's bananas.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So I think those were the two staples of childhood. And of course, like The Goonies also was in there, because The Goonies has aged a lot and obviously you grow up. But What's Up, Doc, is great even now. And I'm sure I'll be watching it till the day I die.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Chad?
I mean, it's obvious that it's Fight Club.
Oh yeah.
Like that's, I mean, for the Scary Thoughts drinking game, that you definitely have to take a shot when I mentioned Fight Club. But and it's been a while actually, but it's a movie that I like. I've become more critical of it as I've gone by, but it was a movie that like I was like enjoyed completely non-critically when it came out. I mean, I was the right mindset and age for it when it hit theaters, and it had. I mean, I could probably talk about it for hours with people, especially people who don't like it. Like, I'm always very interested in people who like have very good reasons for not being a fan of it.
And you, Mark?
Well, the most obvious one I think is Clueless, but I didn't see that until like my mid to late 20s or something for the first time. So it's not part of the tween or teen years. Maybe Liquid Sky. That movie is just so ingrained into my belief that it's a perfect movie that the fact that it's not will forever elude me. Yeah, but I don't know if there are any like zany Hollywood movies that like entertained me as a tween or a teenager that I still think is great.
I mean, for the horror theme, Beetlejuice, I also should mention that was on the right age for Beetlejuice for sure.
Right.
Kanye West had this statement about how like whatever you were into at 12 to 13 will always be the most important thing for you your whole life. And I kind of agree with him, you know, because I have this whole thing about like 1987 being the best year of film ever. And then I was a little under 13 for that. But like, you know, thanks to HBO, you would see all those movies over and over and over again.
Yep.
There's just something to it. Like, it's like you're smart enough to know what's going on, but you're like, thankfully dumb enough to not really be thinking about it critically. You know, like when I saw Red Dawn, I'm not thinking about whether or not like rooting out communism everywhere is bad. You know, I'm just enjoying this movie of teenagers fighting Russians.
I mean, I wonder if it's like there's definitely something to do with the maturity of an individual whereby I just think there's a cutoff point, because I remember very, very clearly there was a point when I was maybe in my early 20s, maybe 24, 25, where I couldn't get into bands in the same way anymore. Like, and I would discover a new band, and it's like I'd had my fill. Like it was weird, you know, because I discovered Bad Religion very late, you know, and I was really into like NoFX was still one of my favorite bands. I was like into all that stuff as a teenager, you know, and Bad Religion just never came along, right? And then I listened to them when I was 25, and I'm just like, shit, this is exactly the sort of thing I should be into, but I can't get into it in the same way. It was like a weird cutoff point, you know, and it's been the same ever since, you know. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I think that's a very common experience. It's only been recently when I've gotten into like weirder stuff like that. I'm looking for just weird background music for working, but I still listen to the same shit I did when I was in high school. Like the same Rancid and Out Come the Wolves album has been on constant rotation since I heard it for the first time when I was in high school.
There should be no shame about that. There should be no shame at all.
I think
that should be perfectly fine.
I think it's a death.
How so?
But you can keep listening, but you never really love it in the same way. You know what I mean? Like, it's just different. Like, you have just a different emotional experience with the world. You know, like,
totally.
I mean, I'm fucking like I still love NoFX. I would say that NoFX probably has as much influence on my copywriting career as anything. Like the way they use lyrics and jokes and stuff like that. Like their whole back catalog was super influential to me.
Yeah, when I was 13, all I cared about was girls and Joy Division, and I have to say, like, I have no objectivity about that band. You know, when I listen to Joy Division, I'm not actually listening to them. It's almost ambient music, even if I'm paying absolute attention, because it's already there, you know.
Yeah, like that. Fantastic band. Recommend that film Control. I'm sure you've seen it. Like, I'm actually that's on my list of things to rewatch. But just quickly on NoFX, I'm gonna Instagram my badass NoFX tattoo, so you can check it out at ESC Samsara.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a Joy Division tattoo.
Plug there.
I have a Joy Division tattoo I'll share.
Oh, dude, yeah. Let's all like Instagram our band tattoos. How about that?
You have a pretty epic Joy Division tattoo, Mark.
Oh, my Joy Division tattoo is the Joy Division tattoo. It's untouchable.
I think the only thing that could have one-upped it would be, and you just can't get it because you can't see it, but if you had gotten a suicide note tattooed instead of lyrics, I think would have been the only.
Oh, fuck. I should have done
that.
But
that's not visible anywhere, so you can't really get that.
Right. Yeah, but joking aside, I think that nostalgic music listening is a form of death. It's a way of entrenching your identity in a time that is over and should be over, but none of us, it's very hard to get out of. It's very hard to move past. And I think that it's also tied to a certain degree of, arrested adolescence that nearly everyone walking on American soil, at least, is guilty of.
So are you saying it would be good for your self-development, i.e. you would find yourself having, noticeable results if you quit listening to all your old favorite bands and like just started like trying to find new music?
So possibly. The difficulty, of course, is that a lot of the energy that is happening in music in the last 50 years is youth-based. And as an adult, especially an adult my age, investing a lot of energy in music made by people in their 20s is a very strange leap to tap into youth energy by listening to their music, but they are speaking from a cultural and age position that I'm disconnected from is weird. But I also think it's weird when I listen to Bauhaus. Like, oh, I'm doing that thing just like I did over a quarter century ago. Fucking get over it, dude.
It's sort of more natural.
You can't win. You can't win. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, it's not like you're gonna throw on like Young Thug and get it. No.
Right. Like I might discover something in Young Thug that I haven't discovered in anything else I've heard in the last 20 years. But one, it's unlikely, and two, well, what am I doing? I mean, it's not even.
What's something new that you really love that you were like surprised by? Like for me, like it's like the rapper Riff Raff. I fucking love him. And that shit is not made for me, you know. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. Like I've done enough drugs, but like, is there anything like that for you?
There's just been a lot of black metal and doom metal that I've been really appreciating lately.
Is that made by people in their 20s? I thought that was more of a mature.
I do not know. I love Chelsea Wolfe and Emma Ruth Rundle. I have no idea what age they are. It's completely elusive to me. FKA Twigs, I think, is one of the greatest living musicians. She might be in her 30s at this point. I have no idea. I don't know. I think I also just don't understand what age people are anymore. Whereas maybe when you're younger, you're a little more connected to knowing who these people are.
I think the youngest person I've liked recently is there are a couple Billie Eilish songs that I actually really like.
Huh.
I've only just stopped really following UK hip hop. Like it's taken me, how old am I now? At least 15 years, because, you know, it was like my thing and I loved it, you know, beyond all recognition. And I always actually kept up. I followed all the record labels and everything. And only now am I just sort of like getting to a place where like I'm looking at all the new releases and kind of not finding the same joy of it. And now I just listen to bloody mantra music most of the time. Just like super new age shit. Just gets me through the day.
Yeah. I will recommend the new Poppy record. I think is pretty stunning and kind of unlike anything else happening that I can find. What were you about to say?
Oh, well, I liked all that early like UK grime music. Like it always felt like it was gonna go in a direction that I think it never really went the direction I wanted to, but like Run the Jewels did. Like I feel like Run the Jewels like really picked up the vibe that I really liked for all that UK grime music.
Yeah, I wasn't a grime kid. I was like there's a kind of a division between UK hip hop and grime, because grime came from, you know, the garage and dance music, dance hall scene, and UK hip hop was really kind of lifted from American stuff. And yeah, a little bit of a separation there, you know, in the music history. But you know, some people love it. I think it's cool too. You know, it's good.
But I never listened to it. You know what I mean? Like I think it was the novelty of it was so interesting to me at the time. And then some of like those really dirty beats.
It was a genuinely new sound. Like I was there, like, you know, oh man, I'm becoming one of those guys, aren't I? Where like I was there in Brixton when like the original dubstep pioneers were playing. Yeah, I remember that. You don't know about dubstep. They ruined it. The bloody Yanks, they ruined it. You know, and like, yeah. So I'm just not going to say that, and let's move on.
There's that great LCD Sound System song about that. Like it's like I think it's like I Was There or something like that. But it's like just him just listing all the things that he was at the forefront of, and it's such a funny song.
To my mind, that was the Smells Like Teen Spirit of the aughts. Like, just completely summing up that moment.
I keep like meaning to pick up that book that's like Please Kill Me, but it's like for the early 2000s New York scene. Yeah. Yeah. It's called like Don't Do Coke in the Bathroom or something. It's got some title like that. But like that music,
that's bad advice, weird, man. Like, where are you going to do coke?
Out on the coffee table where everybody can where everybody can share it. Don't be greedy.
I see like that whole like permissive like communal drug experience isn't what I'm into. Like I like running from cops and hiding drugs and like not giving it to your friends, like that whole like bad person scene is what I was into.
That's so Catholic.
Yeah.
More delicious when it's forbidden. So let's think about this movie as horror for a minute, if we can. Does this contribute to that conversation in any way, or is it just sort of like, there's creepy people next door? That's as far as that gets.
Well, it wouldn't exist without horror. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so because all the music, all the tropes in it, it's all horror based, but it's definitely like horror comedy, which is my jam. Like that. Like, I think if I were to say like horror comedy and horror sci-fi are like pretty parallel to what I consider the best forms of horror.
Yeah, I'd agree. And let's not forget how difficult it is to pull off the horror comedy. Do you know what I mean? There's not a lot of examples of really good horror comedies, and this managed to do it.
Very
Probably
true.
played down the horror aspect a little bit, though.
Yeah. I think that there's a way in which this movie is, in terms of thinking about what collective dread this movie is addressing, it's not so unlike single white female, Fatal Attraction, any movie where like...
Unsane, that's another one.
Oh, in what way?
Well, it's the dread of the stalker, isn't it? A lot of women have that issue.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I guess with this one, I was thinking more about there is someone right next to you that you can't trust. That a lot of those like single white female, that moment in the history of thrillers around, I think, were they all in the wake of Fatal Attraction? Was that the one that sort of kicked it off? Or was there something else first? But they were all sort of about your babysitter, your lover, your wife, your neighbor is actually a killer. And this movie seems to be not part of that, but there's something slightly similar to it where like, don't trust your neighbor. You can't trust your neighbor,
Yeah.
Oh, if you're the Klopeks, you can't trust your neighbors. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I think that's right, Mark. And, that's definitely one aspect where it sort of draws on the horror tradition. If it doesn't, it does play on it. Yeah. So that you can say that. And there's another aspect for me, which is the occult Satanism thing. There's one part in the middle of the film where it does actually verge on genuinely creepy. And that's when they're in the basement. They've got the book on demonology. And okay, the zaniness is there, but that's like a creepy demonology book with references to the incubus and the succubus. And then he has that dream, which is, definitely plays into the fears of the day and, the fears of today if you go to the weird conspiracy areas of the internet. So I would say, yeah, you've got that kind of you can't trust your neighbor aspect, and you've got that kind of like there's creepy Satanists out there type aspect. And they're both moments in the film where it does maybe verge on being a little bit creepy.
Yeah. It's funny. You just brought up something that I had a huge question mark in this movie about. What is he doing with that fucking book?
Good point.
That is a book he has. Why? How did that fall into his hands?
Yeah, that's not the sort of book you'd get out of the library. It's the sort of thing that would, because it's old, right? It's not a kind of like, oh, I'll just check that out. You probably have to go to the reading room for that.
Yeah, I immediately looked to see if it was like a real purchasable prop. I was like, I gotta have this if it's like
beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, for me as a kid, I was just like, well, obviously it's in a basement. Those books come out of basements, don't they?
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of the things I really liked about that book as a prop is when I was in high school, I was like 15 years old. I found a really old, crazy witchcraft book in a school library and stole it. And then it was like nuts. It was like leather bound, had like a crazy embossed design on the front of it. It was really about like, I wish I could remember the title of it, but it was like basically all this like weird John Dee and Wicca shit. And the fact that it was on the shelf in this high school, just there, was so peculiar to me.
When was that published? Would that be it sounds like a kind of 1960s compendium type thing.
It definitely would have been like a 60s, 70s kind of thing. Like, I wish I could remember what it was, but I remember it like trying like one of the rituals out of it. And so, it was definitely like from my memory, like a very Crowley influenced Wiccan book. It's probably a very popular one, but the thing that really sold it in my imagination was this like embossed cover. It had like some sort of raised sigil on it, which was awesome. But but like the whole idea that there would be books just like that just sitting around is just awesome.
Dude, like, I think you should give props to whoever's dope smoking older brother, like, bought that book and then just left it in the school library, you know, just for jokes. That's
That's like
totally.
something Giles would have put in the library for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's amazing.
And I had like a book written by a necromancer in New Orleans that owned this like museum of death called the Westgate, and I had left that book at the St. John's Library in Santa Fe just as a goof. Like I just put it on the shelf where it should be, and I always wondered if anybody ever found it.
Now, Chad, is necromancy like aiming to raise the dead or merely just communicate with the dead? I've never been sure.
Oh, I think probably both. In this woman's particular case, she had some sort of weird sexual attraction to a personification of death called Azrael. So she had this like it functioned as like in like occult terms is like her higher order or her higher guardian angel was kind of their shtick. And then the guy that lived in the building with her was like a very in deep like Crowleyan type dude. And I remember I was like, I must have been like 14 when I met them. And they were like, hey, you know, you should just forget all about this stuff. They're like, just purge this shit from your consciousness and go play football or whatever. And I remember like years later, I was like, what good advice that was. But I didn't take it. And I just got into a bunch of nerd shit.
What was that book called?
Our Name is Melancholy is the name of the book.
Oh, I know that book. Yeah. It's been recommended to me many times since I was a teenager. Never read it.
It's all right.
Yeah. What else have we got for the Burbs?
I watched the Burbs, man. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's a great film.
That's as uncritical as it gets.
So what have we learned?
If you're going to break into your evil neighbor's house, you need really good friends.
Yeah, and you need preferably Bruce Dern or some other vet with a huge, like, I don't know where he got a license for that thing, but it's like, you know, about the size of a greyhound, and you need him to, you know, obviously keep an eye on things. And a bunch of teenagers having a 1980 style pizza party as well. You got to have that.
You basically want as much of this movie in your life as possible, I think, to really be happy.
Yeah, wow. Start with Circus of Power Machine on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. That was really fun.
Oh, guys, you made my year. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Let's do it again sometime. And everybody should absolutely check out the podcast, Escaping Samsara. It is like the heavyweights of that world you have on there.
Yeah, it is a legit, very serious, not serious as in unfun, but like you have some real deal important people on there. And when you're like, hey, do you want to be on there? I was like, do you have the right podcast?
I really had to like do some mental gymnastics to find a crossover between our two podcasts, but I really think it worked, you know? Yeah. But yeah, I appreciate that. You know, we definitely try to, you know, fill the gap where a lot of yoga podcasts are just kind of like, hey, how do I, you know, do this asana, and like, how can I be a nice person, which is all cool. But I'm just like, okay, you know, let's get some people who are like quite close to being genuinely enlightened and find out about their paths.
Yeah. Well, hopefully a year from now, when I've gone into full mushroom wizard mode, I might have some enlightening shit to say again on your show.
If that isn't a spur to your spiritual advancement, Chad, I don't know what is.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.